If you are in this congregation and think of yourself as a young adult, you're going to want to listen to this sermon. If you're someone in this congregation who knows a young adult, you may want to listen to this sermon, and after the sermon, have them go to www.meetyouatthewell.org. Because the Well is truly a gem in our community. It is a place for young people to meet and to greet one another, like the Well in ancient times, where everyone would meet and to get to know one another. That is what the Well is for our congregation. And we decided on the Shabbat Shuvah to ask the Well's director, Rabbi Jeff Stombaugh, to be with us to deliver the sermon. First of all, because Jeff is brilliant and eloquent and wise, and also because it is a Shabbat between Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and none of the other rabbis wanted to write a sermon. So it is with a great deal of nachas that we call upon Rabbi Jeff Stombaugh.
I think they also call that being the korban, the sacrifice. So it's really good to be with you. Shabbat Shalom. So a story is told of a young rabbi in an Eastern European town. During his first day, he was given the tour of the new village by one of the Baal HaBatim, the community leaders. Eventually, they came to the Jewish cemetery, where, as was the custom, all of his rabbinic predecessors were buried in a common section. As they passed by the gravestones, something began to become frighteningly clear to this new young rabbi: the ages on the stones. The life of one rabbi was 34 years. Another was 28, and yet another was a mere 23. There was not a single headstone with a number past 40. As this shocking realization descended upon the new rabbi, he started to sweat. He began to believe that the community was so difficult it was killing off its rabbis. His guide sensed the young rabbi's growing panic. Fearing he was about to start running out of town, he said, "Let me explain, and then you can decide if you want to stay." See, we have a custom in our community where all these rabbis get a notebook. And these are the dates that are not the number of years of these people's lives, they are the number of the years that they truly lived their life. In this notebook, they would write down how much of their time they spent serving God, not just prayer or study, but the number of hours spent living a life of gratitude and not regret, the number of hours living closest to their highest self, living according to the important and not the trivial things. And then at the end of a person's life, we add up all the hours in the notebook, and that is the number we put on the headstone. He lived to 94, not the 38 years engraved there. And pointing to another stone, he said, and this rabbi was on earth for 83 years, not 34. I come back to this story every year. When I first heard it, I was in college, and I remember wondering how many years would be on my headstone. How would I build a life and lifestyle with regular access to my higher self? A version of me that I will be proud of, who lives in service of this world to make it more green, more full of joy, and more fun. I didn't know then just how much my future time and energy would be spent giving attention to a computer screen or being inside. How much of my time would be spent concerned with things out of my control, or just how challenging it would be to put my focus to where I know it needed to go rather than to where it was urgently needed in the moment. This year, when I reread this story, it raised a new question. How is it so easy to slip and fall away from good intentions of how I spend my hours? What's keeping me from putting my attention to where I know it should go instead of where it ends up going? We wake up each morning, the tradition teaches, we are given the world anew, and each night as we go to sleep, we must return it. And when we do, our Creator asks us, what did you do with my creation today? Did you add to my world or diminish it? We need to re-examine the algorithm we use to make our decisions and to measure a life well lived. And what's funny is that we know this. We're familiar with the age-old adage that no one on their deathbed wishes they had spent more time at work. This isn't new. The power to nurture or harm our relationships, to open or shut our hearts, to choose between fear and faith, it all rests with us. Yet the overpowering influence of our culture often pulls us further and further away from our ability to meet, if not even identify, our needs, or create the time or space for paying attention to the things that we need to make real change, to make sacred change in our lives. I'm fine. It is what it is. I don't need anything. Each time this happens, it carves off more years of our life. Brene Brown writes in her book, Atlas of the Heart, that overwhelm is the all too common feeling that our lives are somehow unfolding faster than the human nervous system and psyche are able to manage well. The research indicates that we don't process other emotional information accurately when we feel overwhelmed, and this can result in poor decision-making. Being overwhelmed describes the experience when our emotions are intense, our focus on them is moderate, and our clarity about exactly what we're feeling is low enough that we get confused when trying to identify or describe the emotion. In other words, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm feeling my emotions at about a 10, I'm paying attention to them at about a 5, and I understand them at about a 2. This is not a setup successful for decision-making, and it's just too much going on to manage effectively. Now take a quick breath with me. Shabbat. On Shabbat, we are given tremendously effective tools to slow down. They are as sharp as they are ancient. And at our house on Shabbat, if you were to come over for dinner, we ask the same 2 set of questions every week when we light the candles. The first question is, what is one thing from the past week that you're letting go of? And the second is, what's one thing from the past week that you're holding on to? Simple questions. And then at the end of Shabbat, at Havdalah, whether or not we have a candle or the spices and Debbie Friedman and the whole thing, we ask 2 similar questions. What's one thing that you're holding on to from Shabbat? And what's one thing you're looking forward to in the week ahead? Now, it's important to note that sometimes I do miss the Saturday night window to reflect on these questions, and I don't get to them till Sunday, which, while missing the end of Shabbat, is an excellent couple of questions to help combat the Sunday scaries. And according to the Talmud, is technically within the window of time when it's okay to mark Havdalah in case you forgot, which is all the way through Tuesday. Fun fact. You see, it took me a while to see this, a real long while, but the Jewish wisdom tradition is always asking us to mark time all year with ritual and learning, and therefore is always capable of answering the question, where should I be putting my attention? The answer is not always direct or easy to find. You can't effectively ask Google or ChatGPT, what is the Jewish wisdom tradition asking me to pay attention to right now? And expect to get a sharp answer. But if you do happen to ask ChatGPT, like I did, you might get this response. While I don't have real-time data or specific guidance for this exact day, I can provide insights based on enduring Jewish teachings, which it did. This underscores my point. We have a unique and open access to the wisdom of Jewish time. And by turning towards it, we can be guided towards a life well lived. And while artificial intelligence certainly has libraries of information about Jewish wisdom, only we have the real-time, real-life data about how we're living it. And of course, for everything you can't easily Google or ask to GPT, you can always ask your rabbi. So for now, please indulge me a little bit more while I offer an answer to that question. What is the Jewish wisdom tradition asking me and you to pay attention to right now? And using real-time data, The answer is that we're starting to pay attention to Shabbat Shuvah, the Shabbat that sits, like we heard, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur every year, and literally means Shabbat of returning. Shuvah, sharing a shoresh, or a root word, with teshuvah, the process of self-awareness, admission, forgiveness, and behavioral change that helps us recalibrate our algorithm that we use to make behavioral decisions and measure a life well lived. Shuvah also shares a root with the word yashav, meaning to sit or to dwell or to inhabit. The phrase Shabbat Shuvah emphasizes this root word twice, as if to say sit, sit. Linking the Hebrew term for sitting with both Shabbat, a day when we take a step back from our daily tasks to nourish our spirit, and the concept of returning, when we pause to turn inward and reflect on how we've been documenting our time. Now, as if you were in my house on this Shabbat Shuvah, which you kind of are, in addition to the first two questions, asking what's one thing you're letting go of from this past week and one thing you're holding on to from this past week, I'd also like to invite you to ask, what aspect or quality of who you are needs more attention? What part of yourself that you love or miss needs to be rediscovered, reclaimed, or maybe repented for? Over the next few days, when you open your notebooks and record how you've been spending your time, may you note the amount of time you spent paying attention to Jewish time, or maybe sacred time. And in this next year, may you find it easier to make decisions that puts your faith into the version of you who can cut through the overwhelming noise and doubt to act and become a more empowered, truer, higher version of yourself. Shabbat Shalom and Gamar Tov.